Now we're going to move on to our employer speaker, Jessica Badley from Blood Cancer UK. Jessica, before we again dive in, do you just want to share a little bit about yourself, about Blood Cancer UK and the stage of your organisation you're in at the moment?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Ash. So yeah, I'm Jess. I'm head of HR and OD at Blood Cancer UK. So I've been there coming up for 2 years. It'll be 2 years in November. Feels like a lot longer, but I think that's probably everyone over the past 18 months or so. So as a charity, we exist to try and beat blood cancer and to do that within the next generation. So essentially, we fundraise to pay for that research. So we have funded a lot of research over the past 60 years, which is how long we've been around. And yeah, so everything we do drives towards our mission. So it does mean, as an organisation, and I'm sure everyone else on the call would identify with that, is that there is always a tension about where you spend your money. But for us, I think a really clear thing that we identified really early on was that actually we will only beat blood cancer if we have the most amazing people working for us. So therefore, benefits and financial well-being are a really key part of that for us.
So did I just hear correctly? You joined 2 years ago, so just before the pandemic. So this is where, as you entered into that role, you had a vision of what you were planning on doing, and then pretty much like most strategies and programs and ideas, they got turned upside down that February, March last year. And the reason I allude and bring attention to that is there are many people in a similar situation where they're new to role, they're new to exploring employee benefits. We've seen a big theme in terms of someone's just on a big theme in those who are coming to roles within HR or office management or wellbeing managers who don't necessarily have all the experience previously, but also those who have come from HR backgrounds as well. So it's I'm sure you're going to share some insight in a moment. So to kick off, tell us about what you did. I understand you've recently reviewed your pay and benefits at Blood Cancer UK. Can you just share a little about what prompted you to do that other than the pandemic? And importantly, what was the purpose of why you did it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. When I started in role in November 2019, I had this amazing wellbeing strategy planned out. And like everyone else, that changed pretty fast. So actually, when I joined, there was already kind of a benefits review in progress. And the plan was we were going to launch it in March 2020. And obviously that got hugely derailed because all the things we wanted to do and we thought that our employees wanted us to do, we just couldn't pay for, during the pandemic. So we were like, okay, we'll hold it. But actually holding it was probably the best thing possible for the organisation because it gave us as a HR team the time just to reflect on it and to say, well, actually, I think what we did there was just go for the really obvious benefits. We haven't thought about all these extra things. So actually, although I would much prefer to have put the benefits in 2 years ago, we've got a better strategy now for having spoken to other people and see what they were doing. And I think as well, really checking in with our whole staff team around what was useful for them. So that meant that then at the start of this year, we were able to pick it back up again. And we didn't completely rewrite it, but we did a fair job. And our aims on it, we had quite a few actually. So, and the one that really came to the fore during the pandemic was around the fairness and the transparency of it. And I think as an organisation, actually, we try really hard to do that. But what we realised was that, I guess from like a psychological safety point of view, is that we did have some benefits that were different for different employees. So we had different benefits if you were still on probation, we had different benefits for directors, for example. And I would agree with this from personal experience, that tends to really annoy people. So we thought, right, we need to really look at that. We did really look at our employee value proposition, like why would people want to come and work for a charity? Because it doesn't pay as well as other sectors. So what is it that we can offer to make people really want to work for us? I think we knew that we wanted to reduce our gender pay gap. It wasn't huge, but for us, anything above 0 is bad. So it's got to come down. And we also really wanted to match it up with our equality, diversity and inclusion strategy. And exactly like Getha was saying, what we thought was, it's no good just saying we've got a workforce which is quite a high proportion of millennials, so therefore what they'll want is X, Y, and Z. Because actually, I completely agree with Gethin, like, that's rubbish. What we needed to do was, yes, look at different life stages and different support, but not make assumptions about when people might want that. And the last thing we wanted to do was really be able to give our line managers a lot of autonomy around pay and benefits. But obviously, to do that, we had to have a really useful framework for them to actually do that.
Just as a charity, I think some may have the misconception that, or how have you afforded to invest into it? How have you got the budget to run what you've done? Could you just talk a little bit about how you got your leadership on side? Did you actually have your leadership on side, firstly? And then how that also shaped into some of the decision making, but also how that led to their attitudes and your employee attitudes coming together and aligning to what you actually did, which we'll come on to in a moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I am really lucky at Blood Cancer UK in that the executive team absolutely see the need for finding the best people to come and work for us. So yes, while we work for a charity, the people that work in a charity aren't doing it as volunteers, because we also all have bills to pay. All the people I work with are really talented and really committed to beating blood cancer. So the only way, though, that people can work for you, for the vast majority of your workforce, is if you give them good pay and benefits. And we've all read all this stuff on social media about the Great Resignation, and we don't want to have that either. So I think in terms of a business case for investment in benefits, I think there is so much data out there that's freely available that I think it's reasonably easy to build that case. I would say that we do a lot of things in-house, and we do a lot of things using sort of relationships. So, we ask people to come and do, maybe a session on financial wellbeing. So there is definitely a lot of, connections, asking people if they've got an hour to come and talk to the team, etc.
And as part of your review, and again, leading on from what Gethin said earlier, what elements of co-creation, how did you go about that co-creation exercise?
So we used a couple of different pathways there. So one of them is we do employee surveys, but we do them quarterly. So I'm glad that we don't just do an annual one. To what Gethin said, we do them quarterly. And the reason we use those as one of the ways in is because we know we've got a real mixture of characters within the organisation. Some people are super confident to tell you what they think, and other people aren't. So having like an anonymous survey, we find that we just get more responses and more different responses. So that's always useful. But the other thing we did over, I guess it was about a 12-month period in the end, was ask the whole of the staff team who would like to be involved in almost like a steering group or like a focus group. And so we would test our ideas about what we thought was useful benefit on them, but also they came to us with ideas as well. And that was really great, because there was definitely a few ideas that we thought everyone would love that they were like, meh, and others that they suggested, and we were like, oh, why didn't we think of that? Because obviously everybody knows somebody who works somewhere else, and so you get loads of ideas that way.
When you open it up that way, how do you manage expectation? I.e., oh, here's a list of everything you can have. How do you keep it narrow? I guess there's surveys can have some structure there, but if you open them up in those open conversations, can you just one-liner, how did you keep it focused?
So we tried to do exactly that, just really set expectations at the start around, just because you want it doesn't mean it will necessarily happen, but we will absolutely listen and investigate anything you suggest. Okay. And then briefly, what were the outcomes of your benefits review? What did you actually put in place? You've touched on a few things already, but can you just share what you actually put in place? Yeah, sure. So we did equalise all of our benefits, so that now nobody gets more than anybody else at any stage or in any role. We put in a minimum starting salary as well for all roles of 25,000, and we used to have 2 pay scales. So we had a London scale and a regional scale, and because of the way we work, in that we say you can be based anywhere so long as you meet your objectives, therefore we can't have 2 pay scales, because that's just not fair. So we took out that regional pay scale altogether, just 1 pay scale now. We also put in place a pay policy as well, which doesn't sound exciting at all to most people. But it did, again, going back to that transparency point of view from the whole of the staff team, it meant they can see now how pay progression happens, where benefits are and why. And we also did a few more things around, I guess, financial wellbeing in particular. So we increased our maternity, parental and adoption and paternity leave quite substantially. So it was enhanced, but we've done it as much as we possibly could. We increased annual leave allowance. And we already had things like, I guess most people have, so NEAP, internal wellbeing support. So we've put in more support now around things like menstruation and menopause. The pensions, like I said, are now the same for everybody, so it's not enhanced for any particular roles.
And how's that been received by employees?
So really well. I think the things that we got the most immediate feedback about was equalising benefits. That went down very well, as we knew it would, because people had already been raising it. So yeah. That went down very well. And the transparency around all of the pay and benefits, people being able to see on paper what was available and why.
Okay. One of the often things I hear often from employees is, I didn't know that benefit or program existed, or I didn't know, I saw one of my colleagues had access to this. Where do I find out information about that? So how did you communicate? Because it sounds like a lot of change happened there over a period of time. How did you communicate these benefits to the team? And how then did you maximize the engagement from it?
So I think we've definitely been on a journey with this, because I think a couple of years ago, we were definitely we'd be like, oh, here's a slide with some benefits on. And that would be about it. So obviously nobody's going to engage with them that way. So this time we used our executive team to announce it. So we have a weekly all staff meeting. So we kind of trailed it a few weeks in a row, and then they announced exactly what we were going to do. We also have done training for line managers. So how do you use that pay policy? We also did 2 specific sessions on the benefits. So one with a these are all the benefits, and then a really specific pensions one. And we then tried to just do lots of layered communications, with the idea being that we never leave it more than about a month before we're talking about one benefit. And then we just, change it as we go through. So, this month we've been talking a lot about annual leave and people taking it, etc., and burnout. But equally, another time it might be around pensions, with the idea being that if we just keep it constantly in people's minds, that they have a much better chance of remembering and therefore accessing it.
Thank you. And just opening it up to the room, does anyone have any specific questions for Jess or Gethin in a moment? While I just ask one more question to Jessica. So feel free to put them in the chat box. I can also see in the chat that Luke's commented, I've been thinking about London weighted post-pandemic, so it's great to hear Blood Cancer UK are taking an approach. I think you've already answered some of Gethin's comment there, but he was saying a Judge some Wellbeing Awards for Blood Cancer UK recently, and Jess and her team have done some very impressive things. I'd love to hear a bit about why wellbeing is so important, especially to a third sector organisation where the perception is that employees work there for a vocation. I think you've already touched on that point earlier. So the question we asked Gethin, just his penultimate question, which was, from your perspective, not one thing that employers get wrong, but as you've gone through the process, what's one thing you would do differently? Put you on the spot there, Jess.
Yeah, just one thing as well. So I think the one thing we learned, hopefully quite fast, and definitely fast enough by the end, was, I guess, around some of what Gethin was saying around using, I guess, not behavioural approaches, but thinking about maybe organisational design approaches and how that all links together. So, for example, when we were thinking around equalising the benefits, what we realised is that actually that links really strongly to our performance management system and probation. And therefore that led us to then scrap probation altogether. We don't use it as an organisation anymore, because we were like, actually, this is a really outdated idea and it doesn't work for our organisation. We don't need it. So I think taking our time with it. Obviously, we were forced to take our time, but if we did it again, well, we will do it again at some point, we would definitely really try and make sure it links into more across the organisation.